My name is Patty, and I am 70 years old. As a retired financial literacy instructor, I dedicated my career to empowering individuals with sound money management, teaching them to build secure futures through careful planning and wise decisions. I built a comfortable, independent life through meticulous savings and disciplined financial habits. When my beloved grandson, Cole, reached 18, I poured immense love and guidance into him, establishing a joint bank account to teach him money management. I believed wholeheartedly in his potential, trusting him implicitly with access to my financial future, never imagining that my own lessons about trust and responsibility would become weapons used against me. Over several months, Cole systematically drained over $120,000 from our joint account, leaving me financially devastated. When my $10,000 eye surgery fund was declined at the hospital, I discovered the devastating truth. Cole, with chilling lack of humanity, sneered at my distress. "You're practically blind anyway, Grandma. I needed that money for my supercar." My daughter Brenda yelled, "You're losing your mind, Mom." My son-in-law David called me gullible and stupid. My life savings, my dignity, my professional reputation, all viciously attacked and shattered by the very people I'd sacrificed everything to protect. I felt utterly discarded, financially crippled, and profoundly shamed. Yet as despair threatened to consume my spirit, a financial literacy instructor's unwavering drive for truth and fraud detection ignited a cold, determined fury within me. What Cole, Brenda, David, and their corrupt banker, Mr. Jenkins, didn't know was my secret weapon, meticulous client files in personal journals, documenting every suspicious transaction, every financial red flag, every manipulative conversation. And crucial security cameras in my living room had captured Cole making unauthorized withdrawals while I slept, manipulating my signature on documents. My retired FBI fraud expert ally waited patiently in the wings. This time, their insidious fraud wouldn't just unravel, it would expose their shocking lack of humanity, reclaim my dignity, and restore my peace of mind, proving once and for all that truth triumphs over exploitation. The moment I discovered my account was empty, I felt my 70-year-old heart skip several beats. I was standing at the hospital registration desk trying to pay for my cataract surgery when the payment processor shook her head sympathetically. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Peterson, but this card has been declined. Do you have another form of payment?" The humiliation of having to explain that I needed to check my account balance, that there must be some mistake, burned through me like acid. I'd been managing money professionally for 40 years. I didn't make mistakes with my finances. By the time I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I'd already begun to piece together the horrible truth. The joint account I'd opened with Cole was supposed to contain $135,000, my surgery fund, plus money I'd been saving for emergency home repairs and long-term care. Now it showed a balance of $847. I called Cole immediately, my voice steady, despite the panic rising in my chest. "Cole, honey, I need you to come over right away. There's something wrong with our account." His response should have prepared me for what was coming. "Oh, hey, Grandma. Yeah, I'm kind of busy right now. Can it wait?" "No, Cole, it cannot wait. Someone has stolen over $120,000 from our joint account, and I need you here now to help me figure out what happened." The silence on the other end lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. Cold, dismissive, utterly lacking the warmth I'd known since he was a baby. "Grandma, you're just making this up. I never called you for money or anything like that. You're losing your mind. What money? You must have given it away and forgot about it. This is really sad." The casual cruelty in his voice stunned me into silence. This was the boy I'd helped raise, who'd called me his favorite person in the world, who'd promised to take care of me when I got old. "Cole," I said quietly, "I know you took the money. I need you to explain what happened and how we're going to fix this." His laugh was harsh and ugly. "Fix what? Look, Grandma, I've got over $250,000 in debts from some investments that didn't work out. Gaming, crypto, some other stuff. I figured you wouldn't miss a little bit of your money. You don't need all that cash just sitting around anyway." The admission hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't even denying it. He was justifying it as if my life savings were somehow his birthright. Within an hour, Brenda and David had arrived at my house, clearly summoned by Cole. I'd hoped they would be as shocked as I was that they'd help me understand how this could have happened. Instead, they walked in with expressions of annoyance, as if I were a difficult child who'd called them away from more important matters. "Mom," Brenda said before I could even explain the situation, "Cole told us you're having some kind of breakdown about money. You need to calm down." "Breakdown?" I stared at my daughter in disbelief. "Brenda, Cole has stolen over $120,000 from me. I can't pay for my surgery. I can't—" "Mom, you're losing your mind," Brenda interrupted, her voice rising to a shout. "Cole would never do that. You were too naive giving him access to your accounts. You don't need all that money anyway. You're 70 years old. You're being a greedy old woman, blaming a good boy for your own forgetfulness. You have no humanity left for your own family." The words felt like slaps across my face. David stepped forward, his expression one of practiced patience, dealing with someone he clearly considered mentally impaired. "Honestly, Patty," he said with condescending gentleness, "you brought this on yourself. You're supposed to be the financial expert. Remember? Maybe it's time to admit you're not thinking as clearly as you used to. You're acting crazy." I looked around my living room, the same room where I'd taught Cole about compound interest and responsible spending, where he'd promised to help me manage my money when you're too old to do it yourself, and felt completely alone. "I have documentation," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have records of every transaction, every withdrawal. Cole took money without my permission, and—" "Grandma," Cole interrupted, pulling out his phone with a smirk, "check this out." He showed me his Instagram account, where he'd posted a photo of himself standing next to a bright red sports car. The caption read, "New ride thanks to anonymous generosity. Livin' the dream. Old money, new life. Grandma's pockets deep." The hashtag "Grandma's pockets deep" felt like a knife twisting in my chest. He was mocking me publicly, flaunting his theft as if it were a joke. "You posted this," I whispered, staring at the phone screen. "You're making fun of stealing from me." "It's called living your best life, Grandma," Cole said with a shrug. "Maybe you should try it sometime instead of obsessing over numbers in a bank account." When I tried to call my bank to report the unauthorized transactions, Brenda physically took the phone from my hands. "Mom, David, and I are going to handle this," she said firmly. "You need to rest and let us take care of the financial stuff. You're clearly too upset to think straight." "I don't need you to handle my finances," I protested. "I need you to help me get my money back from Cole." David shook his head with the sort of expression you'd use with a confused child. "Patty, you authorized those transfers when you put Cole's name on the account. It's your responsibility. You made your bed now. You have to lie in it." The next day, I drove to my bank branch, hoping Mr. Jenkins could help me understand what legal options I had. I'd known him for 15 years, had trusted him. With my financial planning, had considered him a friend. His reception was colder than I'd expected. "Ms. Peterson," he said, without even asking me to sit down, I understand you're having some concerns about your joint account with your grandson. Concerns? I felt my blood pressure rising. Mr. Jenkins Cole has stolen over $120,000 from me. I need to know what steps we can take to recover the money. He looked at me with what I can only describe as professional pity. Ms. Peterson, you authorized the transfers when you added him to the account. Legally, any account holder can make withdrawals. There's nothing we can do. It's your responsibility to manage your family relationships. Family relationships? I stood up, my hand shaking. This isn't about relationships. This is about theft. I'm sorry you feel that way, he said, already turning back to his computer. But from a banking perspective, everything was done according to your account agreements. Over the following days, Cole continued to post photos of his expensive purchases on social media, designer clothes, restaurant bills that exceeded my monthly grocery budget, electronics that cost more than most people's rent. Each post felt like another public humiliation, another reminder that my life savings were being treated as his personal entertainment fund. Meanwhile, Brenda and David made it clear that they considered the matter closed. When I tried to discuss my financial situation, they changed the subject or left the room. When I mentioned needing help with basic expenses now that my surgery fund was gone, they suggested I downsize my lifestyle. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise, Brenda said during one particularly painful conversation. You've been too independent for too long. It's time to accept that you need help managing your affairs. That night, sitting alone in my house with bills I couldn't pay and medical appointments I'd have to cancel, I realized that my family wasn't just refusing to help me recover from Cole's theft. They were actively working to convince me that I was the problem. They thought I was a confused old woman who'd made a mistake and was too proud to admit it. They had no idea that I'd been documenting everything that my years of professional experience had taught me to recognize fraud when I saw it. They were about to learn that a woman who'd spent decades teaching others to protect themselves from financial predators wasn't going to go down without a fight. The systematic campaign to isolate me from my own financial life intensified over the following weeks with surgical precision. Brenda and David hadn't just dismissed my concerns about Cole's theft. They'd positioned themselves as my protectors against my own supposedly declining judgment. Mom, Brenda announced during one of her increasingly frequent check-ins. David and I have been talking. We think it's best if we handle your banking for a while. You've been under so much stress, and we don't want you to make any more mistakes. The word mistakes hit me like a slap. In 40 years of teaching financial literacy, I'd never made a significant error with money. Now my own daughter was treating my victimization as evidence of incompetence. I don't need you to handle my banking, I said firmly. I need you to help me get my stolen money back from Cole. David stepped forward with that patronizing expression I was learning to hate. Patty, we've already looked into this. Cole says you gave him permission for those withdrawals. You were probably just confused when you agreed to them. I was never confused, I insisted. I never gave him permission to take $120,000. I can show you my records, my documentation. Mom, Brenda interrupted. Your records are just you writing down what you think happened. That's not proof of anything, except that you're fixated on this conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory, as if documented theft from a joint account was some paranoid delusion, but their financial control was only the beginning. Brenda had begun a subtle social media campaign that painted me as a difficult, demanding mother who was struggling with aging and resistant to help. Her posts were carefully crafted to seem concerned rather than cruel. Worried about Mom today, read one typical post. She's convinced someone stole her money, but we can't find any evidence of that. Sometimes aging means losing the ability to manage complex decisions. Prayers appreciated as we navigate this difficult time." The responses from her friends were predictably sympathetic toward Brenda and pitying toward me. "You're such a good daughter for taking care of her. It's so hard when our parents start losing their faculties. Maybe it's time to consider assisted living." Each comment felt like another nail in the coffin of my reputation and independence. It was during one of my desperate attempts to understand how Cole had managed to withdraw so much money without triggering security alerts that I made a discovery that shattered what remained of my trust in my family. I'd managed to access my old bank statements online before Brenda and David could change my passwords, and I was reviewing the withdrawal patterns when my phone rang. I could hear Brenda's voice coming from the kitchen, where she was supposedly helping me organize my bills. What I heard made my blood run cold. "The old lady is costing us a fortune," Brenda was saying to someone on the phone, her voice filled with irritation rather than concern. "All this caring is just an excuse for her to demand our time and attention. She's a burden we need to shed. Once her house is sold and she's in managed care, we're free." I sat frozen in my chair, listening to my daughter discuss my life as if I were a problematic investment rather than her mother. "Cole did us a favor, honestly," she continued. "Now we have grounds to say she can't manage her finances. The court will give us guardianship, and we can liquidate everything without dealing with her constant interference." The chilling clarity hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about protecting me from my own poor judgment. This was about using Cole's theft as justification for taking complete control of my assets. My daughter wasn't trying to help me recover from financial abuse. She was using it as an opportunity to commit more abuse. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself reflecting on a painful secret I'd carried for over 20 years, a secret that made Brenda's current betrayal even more devastating. When Brenda was 25, she'd made a terrible mistake at her first real job in an accounting firm. Desperate to impress her supervisors and overwhelmed by personal debt, she'd embezzled $75,000 from client accounts, convinced she could replace it before anyone noticed. When the theft was discovered, she'd faced criminal charges that would have destroyed her career and reputation permanently. I'd saved her. Using the entire down payment I'd saved for my dream retirement home, over $50,000 plus additional money I'd borrowed against my own retirement account, I'd quietly reimbursed the firm in exchange for their agreement not to press charges. I'd spent months creating a paper trail that made it look like the reimbursement came from a family trust rather than my personal savings. Brenda never knew the full extent of what I'd sacrificed to protect her. I'd told her only that I'd worked something out with the firm, letting her believe it had been resolved through negotiations rather than my financial devastation. For 20 years, I'd watched her build a successful career and comfortable life on the foundation of my hidden sacrifice. Now, as I listened to her plan my financial destruction, the irony was suffocating. The woman whose career I'd saved by emptying my savings was now using my grandson's theft as justification for stealing what remained of my independence. When I tried to confront Brenda about what I'd overheard, her response was swift and vicious. "Mom, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your sacrifices," she snapped. "Your past choices are your own business. David says you're trying to manipulate us with guilt and sentimentality instead of facing reality about your declining mental state." Cole, who happened to be visiting when this conversation occurred, laughed with genuine amusement. "Grandma's just playing the martyr," he said, scrolling through his phone without even looking up. "It's a classic move. Old people always think their past good deeds should buy them special treatment. But the most devastating blow came from my other grandchildren. Ethan, now 16, and Chloe, 14, had been quietly listening to their parents' conversations about my problems. When I tried to explain to them that I wasn't losing my mind, that their brother had actually stolen from me, their response was swift and cruel. "Grandma, you're old and crazy," Ethan said with the casual dismissiveness that only teenagers can achieve. "Why don't you just accept help instead of causing all this drama?" Chloe's contribution was even more devastating. "Honestly, Grandma, why don't you just die already? Then we wouldn't have to deal with all this fighting." The words came from my 14-year-old granddaughter's mouth, but I recognized Brenda's influence in their cruelty. These children had been coached to see me as a burden, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. It was then that David presented what he called a reasonable solution to our family's difficult situation. "Patty," he said, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table with a folder full of legal documents, "we've consulted with some experts about your situation. The best thing for everyone would be if you voluntarily agreed to a competency evaluation." "A competency evaluation?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Just a formality," he assured me with false warmth. "Once you're declared unable to manage your finances, which is clearly the case given what happened with Cole, we can take over all your affairs legally. You'd still live in your house, but we'd handle all the money decisions. No more stress for you, no more worry for us." The documents he'd prepared would have given him and Brenda complete control over my assets, while simultaneously absolving Cole of any wrongdoing. I would become a ward in my own home, dependent on their generosity for every decision about my life. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then we'll have to pursue involuntary guardianship," he said matter-of-factly. "The court will appoint an independent evaluator, and given your recent erratic behavior and Cole's testimony about your confusion when you gave him the money, the outcome is pretty predictable." That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by 40 years of carefully maintained financial records, and I felt the full weight of my family's betrayal. They weren't trying to protect me from Cole's theft. They were using it as a weapon to steal everything else I had. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated a woman who'd spent her entire career teaching people to recognize and defend against exactly this kind of financial predation. I might be 70 years old, but I wasn't helpless. And I certainly wasn't going to go quietly into the assisted living facility they were already researching for me. The final assault on my independence came exactly 2 weeks after David's ultimatum about the competency evaluation. I should have known they wouldn't wait for my voluntary cooperation. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail with the kind of official weight that makes your hands shake as you sign for it. The return address showed Mr. Jenkins's bank, but the contents were far more devastating than any banking matter. Inside was a court order signed by a judge I'd never heard of, declaring me temporarily incompetent to manage my financial affairs based on evidence of cognitive decline and poor financial judgment. The supporting documentation included statements from Brenda and David describing my increasing confusion, Cole's testimony about my willing gift of the money for his educational expenses, and a report from Dr. Amanda Reeves, a physician I'd never met. According to Dr. Reeves's report, my obsessive focus on imaginary financial crimes and my paranoid accusations against family members were clear indicators of age-related dementia requiring immediate intervention. I was still reading the document when I heard cars pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I saw David's sedan, followed by a white moving van, and Mr. Jenkins's black BMW. My 70-year-old heart began racing as the horrible reality of what was happening hit me. They weren't giving me a choice about the competency evaluation. They'd already had me declared incompetent. David entered my house without knocking, followed by Brenda, Mr. Jenkins, and two men in uniform who introduced themselves as court-appointed guardianship officers. Their expressions were professional, but firm. This wasn't a discussion. "Patty," David said with false gentleness, "we've arranged for your transition to Sunnydale Haven. They have a beautiful room ready for you, and you'll receive excellent care while we sort out your financial situation." I backed away from them, my mind racing. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. I haven't agreed to anything. Mr. Jenkins stepped forward with his clipboard and his banker's smile. "Mrs. Peterson, I understand this is difficult, but the court has determined that living alone is no longer safe for someone in your condition. Your family has made this decision for your own protection. My condition." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "What condition? I'm perfectly healthy and competent. This is about money, not my health." Brenda spoke up with mock concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom, we all know you've been confused lately, making wild accusations, forgetting things, getting agitated over imaginary problems. The family has made this decision because we love you." I looked desperately at the court officers, hoping for some indication that they understood what was really happening, but their faces showed only the practiced neutrality of people who'd done this before, who'd removed other elderly people from their homes based on family testimony and medical reports. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "let me show you my financial records. I can prove that my grandson stole from me, that there's nothing wrong with my mind." One of the officers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked genuinely sympathetic. "Ma'am, we're just here to execute the court order. If you want to challenge the guardianship, you'll need to file an appeal with your own attorney." "With what money?" I asked bitterly. "They've frozen all my accounts." The movers began their work with practiced efficiency, boxing up my precious financial literacy textbooks, my meticulously maintained personal journals, and the memorabilia from my late husband that represented 40 years of marriage. They handled these irreplaceable pieces of my life like ordinary household goods, loading them into boxes marked storage. "Please be careful with those," I cried, watching them pack away my life's work. "Those journals contain important financial records." One of the movers shrugged. "Don't worry, ma'am. Everything's going to a secure storage facility. You can visit your things anytime you want." But I knew that wasn't true. Once they had me institutionalized, once I was declared legally incompetent, I'd never see these documents again. They'd disappear into storage, and eventually, when the storage fees went unpaid, they'd be destroyed or sold. As they prepared to escort me to the van, I made one final desperate plea to Brenda. "Brenda, please don't do this to me. I'm your mother. I raised you. I sacrificed for you. I protected you. Don't let them take me from my home." For just a moment, I saw something flicker in Brenda's eyes, guilt perhaps, or regret. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but David's warning look silenced her. She turned away, unable to watch, but unwilling to stop what was happening. "This is for your own good. Mom," she whispered without meeting my eyes, "you'll be safer there." As they loaded me into the transport van, I caught sight of Cole standing across the street with several of his friends watching the spectacle with obvious amusement. When one of his friends asked what was happening, I heard his response clearly through the van window. "That's my crazy grandma," he said with a laugh. "She finally lost it completely over some money stuff. Honestly, she should have just died quietly instead of causing all this drama for everyone. The casual cruelty of his words, spoken within earshot of neighbors who'd known me for decades, was a humiliation so complete it took my breath away. This was the child I'd helped raise, whose life I'd literally saved when he was born, whose every childhood milestone I'd celebrated. Now, he was publicly mocking my suffering and wishing for my death. Sunnydale Haven was exactly what I'd expected: sterile, impersonal, and designed to warehouse the elderly rather than care for them. My room was small and cheerless, with a narrow bed, a single chair, and a view of the parking lot. My phone was confiscated for my safety, and I was told that all communications would need to be approved by my responsible party, David. It was in this sterile environment, stripped of everything that had given my life meaning, that I finally confronted the most painful secret I'd carried for over 20 years. A secret so devastating that I'd buried it, even from my own conscious thoughts, most of the time. Cole hadn't just been my beloved grandson. He'd been my miracle, a child I'd literally saved through the complete sacrifice of my financial security. When Brenda had Cole at 22, he'd been born with a severe congenital heart defect that required immediate surgery. The procedure cost $200,000, and Brenda and David's insurance had covered less than half of it. Without the surgery, Cole would have died within his first year. I'd used my late husband's entire life insurance payout, $200,000, that was supposed to fund my retirement to pay for Cole's surgery. I'd told Brenda and David that I'd found a way to get the hospital to accept payments over time, but the truth was that I'd emptied my future to save his life. For 20 years, I'd watched Cole grow up healthy and strong, telling myself that the sacrifice had been worth it. Every birthday, every graduation, every proud moment had felt like validation of my choice to prioritize his life over my financial security. Now, as I sat in this institutional room, bankrupt and alone because of his theft, the cosmic irony was overwhelming. The child whose life I'd bought with my retirement fund had stolen what remained of my life savings and publicly mocked my suffering. The woman who had sacrificed her financial future to save him was being punished for his crimes, declared incompetent for being his victim, and institutionalized for trying to hold him accountable. But even in this moment of complete despair, I held on to one crucial truth. Somewhere in my storage unit were 20 years of meticulously maintained financial records. Somewhere in my confiscated personal belongings were the security camera files that would prove Cole's guilt. Somewhere in the professional network I'd built over 4 decades were people who knew my true character and competence. They thought they'd successfully buried me alive, convinced the world I was mentally incompetent, and erased all evidence of their crimes. They thought my years of teaching financial literacy made me naive about financial predation. They were about to discover that a woman who'd spent decades teaching others to protect themselves from exactly this kind of abuse wasn't going to disappear quietly into institutional care. The real fight was about to begin. Life at Sunnydale Haven was designed to break the spirit of anyone who still believed in their own competence. The facility operated under the guise of compassionate elder care, but I quickly discovered it was actually a sophisticated system of psychological control made even more insidious by Brenda and David's generous donations and their carefully crafted progress reports about my condition. Every morning began with what they called wellness checks, humiliating rituals where staff members would ask me basic questions as if testing my mental capacity. What's your name, dear? What year is it? Do you remember why you're here? The condescending tone, the way they spoke to me as if I were a confused child, was deliberately designed to make me question my own cognitive abilities. When I tried to discuss my professional background as a financial literacy instructor to explain the mathematical impossibility of my having willingly given Cole $120,000, the staff would exchange knowing glances and make notes on their clipboards. "You're a resident now, dear, not a money manager," one nurse said with a patronizing smile. "Let's focus on today's activities instead of these old work stories." My attempts to discuss basic budgeting principles or even mention ethical investing concepts were met with swift intervention. "We don't want you to get agitated about financial matters, Mrs. Peterson," they would say, taking away any paper I tried to write on. "Why don't you try some nice adult coloring books instead? Much more appropriate for your current needs." The phrase, "your current needs," followed me everywhere like a toxic cloud. They never specified exactly what my condition was, but it was referenced constantly, as if everyone understood that I was fundamentally impaired in ways that made my thoughts and expertise irrelevant. The most devastating psychological torture came during the supervised visits from my grandchildren. Brenda and David would bring Ethan and Chloe for brief, highly orchestrated encounters that felt more like staged performances designed to document my decline than genuine family visits. Ethan, now 16 and clearly coached beforehand, would ask leading questions designed to make me sound confused. "Grandma, do you remember who I am?" He'd ask, his voice artificially gentle, while Brenda recorded the interaction on her phone. "Do you remember teaching me about saving money when I was little?" The questions were crafted to make me sound delusional if I mentioned the truth about Cole's theft, or disoriented if I couldn't perfectly recall every detail of our past interactions. When I tried to appeal to Ethan's memories of the financial lessons I'd taught him, his responses were carefully scripted. "I remember you being different then, Grandma," he'd say with practiced sadness. But Mom and Dad explained that sometimes older people get confused about money and start imagining things that didn't really happen. Chloe's visits were even more heartbreaking. At 14, she would bring me comfort items, large print word search books, soft blankets, puzzle pieces meant for much younger children, things appropriate for someone with severe cognitive impairment. During one particularly cruel visit, Ethan showed me photographs on his phone, swiping through images of Cole's extravagant lifestyle. "Look, Grandma," he said, showing me a picture of Cole and himself standing in front of the red sports car. "Cole's doing really well with his investments. Dad says you don't need to worry about money anymore because Cole learned so much from you about managing finances." The visual assault of seeing Cole celebrated for his financial success, built entirely on my stolen savings, while being told I should be proud of his learning, was almost more than I could bear. I felt my heart physically ache as I watched Ethan scroll through pictures of Cole's expensive purchases, his face bright with admiration for his older brother's business acumen. But the cruelest blow came when Brenda announced the sale of my home on social media with triumphant fanfare. Her posts showed before and after renderings, the before photos depicting my carefully maintained home as cluttered and outdated, while the after images showed a completely renovated space with modern furnishings and no trace of the personal touches that had made it mine. Finally ready to move forward with some exciting changes, she wrote accompanying the post with photos of herself and David holding a sold sign showing $600 $. Sometimes progress means letting go of outdated attachments and embracing fresh possibilities. Can't wait to see what the new owners do with this space. The comments on her posts were filled with congratulations and praise for their wise investment decisions, and forward-thinking approach to family assets. People who had never known the true story were celebrating the destruction of my life's sanctuary as if it were a victory for modern living. Meanwhile, my financial situation grew more desperate by the day. I discovered that Brenda, using her court-appointed guardianship powers, had not only taken control of my remaining bank accounts, but had also diverted my pension payments and revoked my access to any funds. When I tried to contact my own attorney, I was told that all legal communications had to go through David, who was now handling my legal affairs. The facility staff made my helplessness clear in their casual conversations, which I was obviously meant to overhear. "She's a high-maintenance resident," one aide complained to another. "Family never visits except for those quick check-ins with the kids. Makes you wonder what she did to push them away so completely." These words cut deep because they reinforced the narrative that I was the problem, that my family's systematic abuse was somehow justified by my own failures rather than their calculated cruelty. Just when despair threatened to consume me completely, an unexpected source of hope appeared. Maria, the same young aide who had shown me kindness at Memory Lane Gardens, had somehow found employment at Sunnydale Haven. During one of her quiet night shifts, she approached me with obvious concern. "Mrs. Peterson," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was watching, "I brought you something I thought you might like." She quietly slipped a small, worn financial literacy textbook into my hands, one of the basic guides I'd used in my teaching career. "Someone left this in the staff break room, and I remembered you talking about teaching people about money management." Later, alone in my room, I opened the textbook and found something that made my heart skip a beat. Tucked inside the back cover in handwriting, I recognized was a tiny, almost invisible inscription: "Dr. Vance's help." Dr. Eleanor Vance, my personal physician of 15 years who had conducted a comprehensive cognitive assessment just 6 months before this nightmare began. Dr. Vance, who had documented my excellent mental acuity, my sharp memory, and my complete competence in all areas of cognitive function. The inscription could only mean one thing. Dr. Vance was somehow aware of my situation and was trying to communicate that help was available. More importantly, it meant that somewhere in her medical files was recent professional documentation of my mental competence that directly contradicted the fabricated reports being used to justify my institutionalization. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. I wasn't completely abandoned. Someone with medical credentials and professional standing understood what was really happening, and somewhere out there, evidence of my true mental state was waiting to be revealed. That night, I lay in my narrow, institutional bed, clutching the textbook like a lifeline. They thought they'd successfully gaslighted me into questioning my own sanity, convinced the world I was mentally incompetent, and erased all evidence of my professional competence. They didn't know about Dr. Vance. They didn't know about Maria's kindness. And they certainly didn't understand the determination of a woman who had spent her life teaching people to recognize and defend against exactly the kind of systematic financial abuse I was experiencing. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. 8 months into my imprisonment at Sunnydale Haven, Cole unveiled his masterpiece of public manipulation, a highly publicized national Financial Empowerment for Modern Families conference that would forever poison my professional legacy while celebrating his theft as innovation. The event was planned with the precision of a corporate product launch. Major financial media outlets received press releases touting Cole as a rising star in generational wealth transfer and a disruptive thinker, challenging outdated financial orthodoxy. Regional newspapers and podcasts featured preview interviews where Cole positioned himself as someone who'd learned valuable lessons from his grandmother's traditional approaches before evolving beyond them. The conference was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the Grand Convention Center downtown, complete with professional lighting, multiple camera crews, and a live stream that would reach thousands of viewers. Cole had somehow positioned himself as the keynote speaker, and I learned from overheard staff conversations that he'd been promoting the event as a revolutionary approach to family financial planning. Most sickeningly, Cole had based his entire presentation on my meticulously maintained financial records, the journals and documentation that had been confiscated from my home and supposedly sent to storage. He'd taken 40 years of my careful financial planning, my teaching materials, and my retirement strategy, and he was presenting them as examples of inefficient, fear-based money management that modern families needed to reject. I learned about the event the way I learned about everything involving my stolen life now, through the casual cruelty of staff members who thought I was too mentally impaired to understand what they were discussing. "Did you see that young man on the morning show?" one aide said to another during the shift change. "The one talking about old-fashioned budgeting. His grandmother is one of our residents. Sad how the older generation just can't adapt to modern financial thinking." The live stream was playing in the common room when I managed to slip in during the afternoon. What I saw was a calculated dismantling of everything I dedicated my career to protecting. Cole stood at a podium wearing an expensive suit I'd unknowingly paid for, speaking to a crowd of several hundred people about his innovative approach to liberating family wealth from generational hoarding. "Too often," he said, his voice carrying across the room with practiced confidence, "we allow outdated financial anxiety to prevent prosperity. My grandmother's generation was obsessed with saving every penny, living in constant fear of imaginary financial disasters. But what if that fear was actually creating the very poverty they were trying to avoid?" He clicked through PowerPoint slides that I recognized as digitized versions of my own budget worksheets and retirement planning documents. But he'd manipulated the data, taking my careful 30-year savings plan and presenting it as evidence of financial repression and scarcity mindset. "Look at this example," he said, pointing to a chart that showed my meticulous monthly budgeting. "My grandmother saved 70% of her income for 40 years. 70%. She denied herself experiences, travel, quality of life, all to accumulate money she was too afraid to ever spend. That's not financial wisdom, that's financial illness." The audience murmured with sympathetic understanding. These people didn't know that my financial illness had paid for his life-saving surgery as a baby, had funded Brenda's career after her embezzlement scandal had created the very financial security that Cole was now celebrating himself for liberating. Brenda spoke next, her presentation focusing on the emotional toll of living with someone obsessed with unrealistic financial control. She'd hired graphic designers to create beautiful slides showing the difference between fear-based saving and abundance-minded investing. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is freedom from our own financial trauma, she said, looking directly into the camera with practiced sincerity. My mother's generation lived through the Depression mindset, but we don't have to pass that anxiety on to our kids. Sometimes love means breaking free from destructive patterns. Breaking free from destructive patterns. She was using the language of mental health recovery to justify stealing my life savings. But the most devastating moment came when they played pre-recorded video messages from my other grandchildren. Ethan, now 16, and looking heartbreakingly like his grandfather, spoke directly to the camera with the same practiced sincerity I'd seen during his visits to the facility. "I'm grateful my family taught me that money should work for you, not the other way around," he said, standing in what I recognized as my former living room, now completely redecorated. My grandmother always wanted us to learn about finances, but she was stuck in old ways of thinking. Now I understand that financial freedom means taking smart risks, not hiding money in savings accounts. The words were clearly scripted, but Ethan delivered them with conviction. This was the boy I'd taught about compound interest and responsible spending, who'd promised to help me manage my accounts. "When you're too old to do math, Grandma." Now he was publicly rejecting everything I'd tried to teach him about financial responsibility. Chloe's segment was shorter, but equally painful. The 14-year-old appeared in what was clearly a professionally produced segment, giggling as she held up one of my old budgeting worksheets. "Grandma used to make us fill these out," she said with manufactured enthusiasm. "So boring and slow. We prefer quick digital trades and crypto investments. This is like using a typewriter when you have a smartphone." The casual dismissal of my life's work as outdated technology, the reduction of decades of financial expertise to obsolete methodology, felt like watching my professional grave being dug in real time. As the conference concluded with Cole receiving a standing ovation for his courage in challenging generational financial trauma, I collapsed in my chair in the common room, my body shaking with rage and despair so profound I couldn't catch my breath. But even in that moment of absolute professional devastation, something unexpected happened. As the live stream ended and the staff began changing channels, I heard one of them mention something that pierced through my grief like a ray of light. "You know," Maria said quietly to another aide, "there was a woman calling the front desk earlier, asking about Mrs. Peterson. Said she was a former student who'd seen the conference and was concerned about some of the financial information being presented." The caller seemed really upset about the way Mrs. Peterson's work was being described. A former student who understood that something was fundamentally wrong with Cole's presentation. Someone from my professional past who recognized that the outdated financial anxiety being mocked was actually sound. Financial planning being deliberately misrepresented. It could only be Dr. Sarah Martinez, the financial ethics expert, who'd been one of my most dedicated students 15 years ago. Sarah had gone on to become a respected voice in the financial planning community, known for her work on elder financial abuse and family exploitation. If Sarah was watching, if she was questioning what she'd seen, then maybe the professional community I'd served for so long wasn't completely convinced by Cole and Brenda's narrative of my incompetence. For the first time since being imprisoned in this facility, I felt something other than despair. I felt the stirring of hope and the beginning of understanding that my life's work had touched people who might be willing to fight for the truth. They thought they'd destroyed my professional credibility, turned my expertise into a cautionary tale, and successfully buried my legacy under their manufactured narrative of my mental decline. They didn't know that truth has a way of surfacing, especially when it's been buried by people who don't understand the difference between financial wisdom and financial fear. The final phase of my destruction began exactly 2 weeks after Cole's financial conference, as if the public celebration of my stolen expertise had been the signal for them to deliver the killing blow to any hope I might have retained for justice or dignity. The lawsuit documents arrived at Sunnydale Haven on a Monday morning, delivered not to me, but to the facility administrator, another reminder that I was no longer considered competent to handle my own legal affairs. The thick manila envelope contained a complaint that would have been laughable if it weren't so devastatingly effective, Cole was suing me for $1.5 million. According to the meticulously crafted legal document, my harassment and false accusations regarding the joint account had caused Cole severe emotional distress and damaged his emerging reputation as a financial educator. My erratic behavior and public defamation had interfered with his business prospects. Most grotesquely, the lawsuit claimed that my obsessive financial hoarding and paranoid accusations had created a hostile family environment that had negatively impacted his mental health and career development. Every word was a carefully constructed lie, but lies wrapped in legal language and filed in official court documents carry weight that truth spoken by a woman in an assisted living facility cannot match. The message was clear. Even if I somehow found a way to challenge their theft, the cost of defending myself against this frivolous lawsuit would consume whatever resources I might have left. But Cole wasn't finished with his financial assault. Using connections he'd made through his conference appearances and Brenda's social network, he simultaneously launched attacks on every remaining source of income or professional recognition I might have had. He contacted the school district where I'd taught financial literacy for 30 years, filing formal complaints about my professional conduct. Using the fabricated medical reports as evidence, he claimed that my cognitive decline had been developing for years, calling into question the validity of all my previous teaching. We have serious concerns about Mrs. Peterson's mental competence during her final years of employment. His letter to the district stated, "There are questions about whether her curriculum met current educational standards and whether her teaching certification should be revoked retroactively for gross misconduct." The response was swift and devastating. Within 3 weeks, I received a letter informing me that my teaching certifications were being revoked. My membership in professional education associations was terminated, and my pension payments were permanently suspended, pending a full investigation into allegations of educational malpractice and financial misconduct in my classroom management. 40 years of dedicated teaching, thousands of students helped toward financial literacy, decades of curriculum development and educational innovation, all of it dismissed and invalidated based on the lies of a grandson who had stolen my retirement savings and was now using my professional destruction to cover his tracks. The loss of my pension meant I could no longer afford even the basic care at Sunnydale Haven. The facility administrator, Mrs. Richardson, called me into her office with obvious discomfort to explain my transition options. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm afraid your family has indicated they can no longer cover the costs of your care here," she said, avoiding my eyes. "We'll need to arrange for your transfer to county care until your legal situation is resolved." County care, the warehouse-style nursing facility where indigent elderly people were stored until they died, a place I'd visited during my teaching career when students had family members there and had always prayed I'd never end up. But even this wasn't the depth of their cruelty. The eviction from my home had been perfectly timed to maximize my humiliation. Brenda had somehow learned that my pension suspension would force me out of Sunnydale Haven, and she'd arranged for local media to be present as my remaining possessions were auctioned off to cover mounting care costs. The news story that aired that evening showed my entire life being sold piece by piece to strangers. My husband's antique desk went for $150. The china we'd received as wedding gifts sold for $75. The financial literacy textbooks I'd collected over decades were bundled together and sold for $25 to someone who probably intended to throw them away. The reporter interviewed Brenda on camera, and her performance was masterful. She stood in the driveway of what had been my home, wearing a perfectly coordinated outfit and an expression of practiced sorrow. "It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love struggle with these kinds of issues," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We tried everything we could to help Mom maintain her independence, but sometimes you have to make hard decisions about what's financially realistic." Standing beside her, David nodded gravely. "We want what's best for the family," he said. "Sometimes that means accepting difficult realities about aging and financial management." They looked like concerned family members making painful but necessary decisions about an elderly relative's care. The viewing public saw only their composed explanations and footage of my belongings being sold to cover care costs. No one questioned their narrative or wondered why a respected educator had suddenly become destitute and confused. But Cole's cruelest display of triumph was yet to come. Using the proceeds from my home sale, which had netted over $600,000 after his legal fees and administrative costs, he made a highly publicized purchase that felt like a deliberate slap in my face. He bought Brenda and David a custom-built home theater system worth $50,000, complete with leather recliners, a massive screen, and sound equipment that cost more than most families' annual income. The dedication ceremony was covered extensively in local lifestyle media, with Cole speaking about the importance of investing in family experiences and creating spaces for generational bonding. "My grandmother always taught me that money should be used to bring families together," he told the gathered crowd of friends and media. "This theater represents everything she believed in using financial resources to create lasting memories and strengthen family bonds." The irony was sickening. He was using money stolen from my retirement savings to fund a memorial to my supposed values, presenting himself as someone who honored family financial wisdom, while he was actively destroying the woman who had actually taught him everything he knew about money. The stress of losing everything: my home, my income, my professional reputation, my family relationships, while watching my tormentors be praised for their supposed generosity, proved too much for my 70-year-old body to handle. The stroke came while I was sitting in the county nursing facility's day room, watching the local news coverage of Cole's home theater dedication. One moment I was listening to him speak about my legacy of family financial values, and the next I was on the floor, my vision going dark as nurses rushed to help. I woke up in the county hospital's emergency ward, connected to machines that monitored every function of my damaged brain. The neurologist, Dr. Kim, explained that I'd suffered a significant stroke brought on by severe stress, and that my cognitive function might be permanently impaired. "You're lucky to be alive," she said gently. "Your brain was under tremendous strain. The combination of emotional trauma and financial stress can be just as dangerous as any physical threat." As I lay in that hospital bed, barely able to speak and partially paralyzed on my left side, my mind drifted in and out of consciousness. In those hazy moments between sleep and waking, I found myself remembering a financial literacy class I'd taught years ago, a session that had haunted me because I'd been unable to help the student involved. I could see her clearly in my memory, a young woman named Jennifer, whose elderly father was being systematically drained by his adult son. The son had convinced everyone that his father was losing his mental capacity, had gained control of his finances, and was stealing his retirement savings while positioning himself as a concerned caregiver. In my dream state, the parallels became crystal clear. Cole's behavior, Brenda's complicity, the systematic isolation and financial abuse. It was exactly the same pattern I'd witnessed in that classroom 20 years ago. The only difference was that now I was the victim instead of the teacher, trying to help someone else escape. The realization was both devastating and energizing. I wasn't just a confused old woman being victimized by greedy family members. I was experiencing a textbook case of elder financial abuse, executed with the same tactics I'd spent decades teaching people to recognize and defend against. They thought they destroyed my ability to think clearly, but my stroke had actually crystallized my understanding of what was happening to me. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being systematically destroyed by people who understood exactly how to exploit the legal and social systems designed to protect elderly people. As my strength slowly returned, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. The clarity that comes from recognizing a familiar pattern and understanding that there are proven ways to fight back. They thought they'd silenced me permanently. They were about to discover that a woman who'd spent her career teaching people to recognize financial predators had just remembered every lesson she'd ever learned about fighting back. My recovery from the stroke was slow and frustrating, but it was also clarifying in ways I hadn't expected. Lying in that hospital bed with my left side partially paralyzed and my speech slurred, I felt the fragmented pieces of my professional knowledge reassembling into a coherent understanding of the systematic abuse I was experiencing. Dr. Kim had been honest about my prognosis. The stress-induced stroke had caused significant damage, and while I might recover enough to communicate effectively again, I would never be the same physically robust woman I'd once been. But what she didn't understand was that my physical weakness was being matched by a growing mental clarity about the financial fraud patterns I was witnessing. It was during my third week in the stroke rehabilitation unit that I made the decision to record what might be my final testimony. With the help of a compassionate nurse named Patricia, who had been horrified by my story and had witnessed the complete absence of family visits during my hospitalization, I managed to create a video message using her personal tablet. The recording was raw and unfiltered. Sitting propped up in my hospital bed, still connected to monitoring equipment, I spoke directly to the camera with the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything important to say. My name is Patricia Peterson, and I may not have much time left to tell the truth about the systematic financial abuse that has destroyed my life. I began my voice steady despite my physical limitations. I played the audio recordings I'd secretly made during those first devastating conversations with Cole, recordings I'd managed to create using my phone's voice memo function when I'd sensed something was wrong with his emergency money requests. Cole's voice came through clearly revealing the calculated nature of his theft. "Grandma's so easy to manipulate," his recorded voice declared in a conversation I'd captured when he thought I was sleeping. "I just tell her it's for educational expenses or investment opportunities, and she hands over whatever I ask for. It's like she wants to believe I'm still the good kid she thinks I am." In the video, I also carefully revealed my professional background and expertise, explaining how my 40 years of teaching financial literacy had trained me to recognize the exact patterns of abuse that were being used against me. Most importantly, I shared my documentation of Cole's systematic theft and Brenda's complicity in covering it up. "My daughter Brenda isn't trying to protect me," I explained, looking directly into the camera. "She's using my grandson's theft as justification for stealing everything else I own. This isn't about my mental capacity. This is about using fabricated medical reports and family testimony to commit legal financial abuse." The recording was devastating in its quiet authority. No screaming, no dramatic accusations, just a stroke survivor telling the truth, with documented evidence and professional expertise backing up every claim. Patricia helped me prepare the video for delivery to Brenda with copies sent to local media and the district attorney's office. My plan was simple: give Brenda one last chance to do the right thing, to choose truth over greed, to remember that I was her mother, rather than just an obstacle to her financial goals. But I had underestimated Cole's paranoia and his network of corrupted allies throughout the healthcare and legal systems, through methods I would later discover involved bribing hospital staff and monitoring my communications. Cole intercepted my video message before it could reach Brenda or any legitimate authorities. The same network that had helped him gain access to my financial records and manipulate my medical reports now gave him advance warning of my attempt to expose the truth. What Cole did next revealed the true depth of his cunning and his complete absence of moral boundaries. Working with the same video production company that had helped create his financial conference presentation, he took my raw, honest testimony and subjected it to sophisticated digital manipulation that transformed it into something unrecognizable. He altered the audio to make my post-stroke speech sound even more slurred and confused, inserted long pauses that suggested severe cognitive impairment, and spliced together sentences to create statements I'd never made. Most insidiously, he completely removed the audio evidence of his own damning statements, replacing them with distorted noise that he claimed was unintelligible rambling, proving my mental deterioration. My professional credentials and documented evidence were edited to make them sound like paranoid fantasies about conspiracy theories and imaginary expertise. The final product bore no resemblance to my original message. Instead of a stroke survivor's truthful testimony, it appeared to be the delusional rantings of someone suffering from severe dementia, possibly complicated by the neurological effects of my recent stroke. Cole then sold this fabricated video to Family Crisis Today, a tabloid television show that specialized in exploiting family dysfunction for entertainment value. He presented himself as a concerned grandson, trying to help a deeply disturbed grandmother who was harassing the family with increasingly bizarre accusations. The segment aired on a Thursday evening, reaching millions of viewers across the country. The host introduced it with breathless sensationalism that made my suffering into entertainment. Tonight, a heartbreaking investigation into a family torn apart by dementia delusion and an elderly woman's desperate attempt to destroy her own relatives' lives with false accusations of theft and conspiracy. The doctored video was presented as definitive evidence of my rapid cognitive decline following my stroke and my cruel attempts to blame family members for her own financial mismanagement. Expert commentary from a neuropsychologist who had never met me analyzed my paranoid ideation and grandiose delusions about professional expertise. But the cruelest blow came when Brenda appeared for a live interview immediately following the segment. Dressed in somber clothing and looking every inch the grieving daughter, she spoke with practiced emotion about my tragic decline and her heartbreak at watching me slip away from reality. It's devastating to see someone you love become so consumed by paranoia and anger. Brenda said, her voice catching with what seemed like genuine emotion. Mom was always a strong, intelligent woman, but since her stroke, she's become convinced that everyone is conspiring against her. The accusations she's making, they're not only false, they're deeply hurtful to our family's healing process. David, sitting beside her with tears in his eyes, added his own devastating testimony. We've tried everything to help Patty, but she rejects every attempt at support. She's created this elaborate fantasy where we're all villains in some conspiracy to steal from her, when the truth is, We're just trying to take care of her medical expenses and basic needs." The interviewer leaned forward with feigned sympathy. "This must be incredibly difficult for your children as well." "It is," Brenda nodded gravely. "Ethan is here with us tonight because he wanted people to understand how this has affected our family." The camera panned to show Ethan sitting beside his mother, looking mature and thoughtful beyond his 16 years. When asked about his grandmother's behavior, he spoke with carefully coached sincerity that broke my heart completely. "I love Grandma Patty," he said, his young voice steady and convincing. "But since her stroke, she's been saying things that aren't true, making accusations against people who are just trying to help her. It's scary sometimes, and we just want her to get the help she needs so she can be peaceful again." The performance was flawless. Brenda, David, and Ethan came across as a loving family trying to cope with a difficult, mentally compromised relative. I was portrayed as a tragic figure whose illness had transformed me from a beloved family member into a source of pain and false accusations. The segment ended with Brenda making a public plea for privacy during this difficult time, while expressing hope that I would accept the professional help being offered and find peace in whatever time I have left. Within hours, the story had gone viral on social media. My name became associated with cautionary tales about stroke-related dementia, family dysfunction, and the dangers of allowing elderly relatives with cognitive impairment to make false accusations. Comment sections filled with armchair diagnoses and expressions of sympathy for my poor family who were dealing with such a heartbreaking situation. The complete character assassination was so thorough, so professionally executed, that even I might have believed it if I hadn't been living the truth. Watching myself portrayed as a delusional, paranoid woman making false accusations against loving family members was like watching my own funeral while still being alive to witness it. But even in that moment of utter defeat, when it seemed that truth itself had been murdered and buried along with my reputation, I held on to one crucial fact somewhere out there. Dr. Sarah Martinez had seen Cole's financial conference and had recognized that something was fundamentally wrong with his presentation. And there were people, Dr. Vance Maria, others in the professional community who had known me for decades, who might recognize that the woman in that twisted video wasn't the Patricia Peterson they had known and respected. They thought they had silenced me forever, turned my own voice into a weapon against me, and convinced the world that I was everything they claimed I was. They thought my stroke had made me helpless, my age had made me irrelevant, and my isolation had made me powerless. They were about to discover that truth has allies they never suspected, and that some fights are too important to abandon, even when defeat seems certain. The miracle I'd been hoping for came from an unexpected source, Dr. Sarah Martinez, my former student who had become a respected financial ethics expert. 4 months after my national humiliation, as I lay recovering in the county hospital's long-term care ward, I received a visit that would change everything. Dr. Martinez walked into my room carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression of righteous fury I'd never seen on her usually composed face. Behind her came 2 other people. I didn't immediately recognize a distinguished older man and a middle-aged woman with the bearing of someone accustomed to courtrooms. "Mrs. Peterson," Sarah said, taking my hand, "I've been investigating your situation since I saw that horrific conference where your grandson twisted your life's work into a mockery. What they've done to you isn't just criminal, it's an abomination against everything you taught us about financial integrity and family responsibility." Sarah explained that she'd used her connections in the financial crimes community to assemble a formidable legal team. The man was Agent Robert Chen, a retired FBI financial crime specialist who had volunteered to take on my case after seeing the manipulated video and recognizing the sophisticated nature of the fraud. The woman was Jennifer Walsh, an elder law attorney who specialized in complex family financial abuse cases. But more than that, they'd secured funding for the legal battle through a charitable foundation that supported elderly victims of family fraud, and they'd recovered something I thought was lost forever. "We found your security system recordings," Agent Chen said quietly. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Garrett, had been monitoring your cameras remotely as part of your home security arrangement. Everything was backed up to cloud storage that Cole never knew existed. The federal lawsuit we filed was comprehensive and devastating. Cole, Brenda, and David were charged with elder abuse, criminal fraud, conspiracy, and defamation. The charges carried serious prison time and massive financial penalties. More importantly, the case attracted global attention, partly because of the viral video that had destroyed my reputation, and partly because it represented a perfect example of how sophisticated family fraud had become in the digital age. The trial began on a cold March morning with media trucks lined up outside the federal courthouse and crowds of spectators hoping to witness what the press had dubbed the case of the stolen trust. I sat in the front row, wearing the navy blue dress I'd worn to my husband's funeral decades ago, my hands steady for the first time in years. Cole, Brenda, and David entered with their legal team, still projecting confidence, despite the mounting evidence against them. They'd hired expensive attorneys who'd built their defense around my supposed mental instability and their clients' good faith efforts to care for a difficult elderly relative. That confidence lasted exactly until my legal team began presenting the audio and video evidence from my home security system. The courtroom fell silent as the first recording played Cole's voice clear and unmistakable, discussing his theft with casual cruelty. "Grandma's so easy to manipulate," his recorded voice declared. "I just tell her it's for educational expenses or emergency situations, and she hands over whatever I ask for. She actually thinks I'm using the money responsibly. It's pathetic how much she trusts me." But it was the recording of Brenda and Cole together that truly shattered their facade. The audio captured them in my own living room, discussing their systematic plan to drain my accounts. "We need to move faster," Brenda's voice said with chilling calculation. "She's got over $400,000 in retirement savings that we can access once we get full guardianship. The key is making sure everyone believes she's mentally incompetent." Cole's response was even more damning. "Don't worry, I've already taken most of the joint account money. Once we get her declared incompetent, we can liquidate everything else. She'll never be able to prove what really happened." The raw greed and calculated cruelty were laid bare before the court and the world. These weren't family members making difficult decisions about an elderly relative's care. These were predators systematically destroying a vulnerable woman for financial gain, while positioning themselves as concerned caregivers. The video evidence was even more devastating. The hidden cameras had captured Cole forging my signature on withdrawal slips, practicing my handwriting while I slept in my chair. They'd recorded Brenda coaching Ethan and Chloe on what to say during their visits to the nursing facility. "Remember," Brenda's voice instructed the children, "Grandma isn't thinking clearly anymore. When you visit her, act concerned about her memory. Ask her questions she might not remember perfectly. We need documentation that she's confused." Most shocking of all was a recording from the night before my stroke, where Cole and Brenda discussed their final strategy with David. "Once she's had some kind of medical crisis," Brenda said with satisfaction, "we can use that as proof that she needs full-time care. Her house sale will clear all our debts, and there won't be anyone left to question our decisions. David's participation was equally damning. "I'll handle the legal paperwork," he said. "My contacts at the bank will make sure everything looks legitimate. She'll never recover from this financially or mentally." When Cole was called to testify, the transformation was immediate and shocking. The confident young entrepreneur who had charmed television audiences and financial conference attendees was gone. Faced with his own recorded words, his own documented cruelty, and the irrefutable evidence of his systematic abuse, Cole simply disintegrated. He began stammering, then weeping, then shaking uncontrollably on the witness stand. When the prosecutor asked him to explain his statement about manipulating his easy grandmother, Cole's composure shattered completely. I didn't mean it like that," he sobbed, his voice breaking. "I needed the money. I had debts, gambling problems. I thought she'd never miss it. She had so much, and I was drowning." The prosecutor pressed harder. "Mr. Peterson, in this recording, you discussed taking over $120,000 from your grandmother and planning to steal her remaining $400,000. How was that helping her?" Cole's facade crumbled entirely. "I was going to pay it back," he whispered, his face buried in his hands. "I never meant for it to go this far. I needed the money so badly, and she trusted me so much. I convinced myself she wouldn't mind." The sight of him, this young man, who had systematically destroyed my life while positioning himself as a financial innovator, completely broken by his own recorded admissions, was both heartbreaking and vindicating. This wasn't the calculated sociopathy I'd expected. It was the complete moral collapse of someone who had convinced himself his desperation justified destroying the person who loved him most. Brenda attempted to flee the courtroom during the lunch recess, but was apprehended in the parking garage. Her arrest was broadcast live, showing her screaming about being set up and betrayed by a bitter old woman, completing the destruction of the concerned daughter she'd pretended to be. But it was David's testimony that proved most devastating to witness. When called to the stand, he had to listen to his own voice planning. My destruction had to watch his son, Cole's complete psychological breakdown, had to confront the magnitude of what their family had done to me. David's own breakdown was swift and complete. As the recordings played, showing the depth of Cole's callousness and his own participation in my systematic abuse, he began sobbing openly on the witness stand. "I thought we were protecting the family's financial future," he said through tears. "Cole convinced us that Patty was becoming a burden, that she'd want us to be financially secure. I never realized how much we were hurting her." Mr. Jenkins, the corrupt bank manager, was arrested the same day and immediately faced criminal charges for his role in facilitating the fraud. The conspiracy they'd built had collapsed entirely under the weight of their own recorded words. When Judge Patricia Morrison read the verdict, finding Cole, Brenda, and David guilty on all charges, the courtroom erupted in applause. But I felt only a quiet, profound relief. The truth had finally been heard, my voice had been restored, and my professional reputation, built on 40 years of teaching people to recognize and defend against exactly this kind of abuse, had been vindicated. Justice had taken 2 years to arrive, but it had arrived completely and publicly. The whole world now knew who the real predators were in this story, and who the real victim had been all along. The court's verdict was as comprehensive as it was decisive. Judge Morrison, a distinguished woman who had clearly been moved by the evidence and the scope of the conspiracy, delivered the sentencing with gravity befitting the magnitude of the crimes. Cole received 8 years in federal prison for elder abuse fraud conspiracy and orchestrating the defamation campaign that had destroyed my reputation nationally. The judge noted that his position as my trusted grandson, combined with his systematic exploitation of that trust, represented family betrayal in its most calculating and devastating form. Brenda received 5 years for her role in the conspiracy, though the judge acknowledged her evident remorse and psychological breakdown as mitigating factors. While Mrs. Walsh's actions were inexcusable, Judge Morrison stated, the court recognizes that she was manipulated by her son's desperate need to cover his own crimes. David received 3 years of supervised probation and was ordered to pay substantial fines, though his cooperation with the investigation and his evident psychological collapse had earned him some leniency. Mr. Jenkins received 4 years and permanent loss of his banking license for his role in facilitating the fraud. Most importantly, I was awarded complete restitution, the full $120,000 Cole had stolen, plus an additional $300,000 in punitive damages for emotional distress, the forced sale of my home, and my destroyed professional reputation. The court also ordered the immediate return of all my confiscated personal property and financial records. But the financial restoration, while crucial, meant less to me than Judge Morrison's formal statement vindicating my character and competence. Mrs. Peterson, she said, looking directly at me from the bench, you have endured a campaign of financial and psychological abuse that represents family betrayal in its most sophisticated and cruel form. Your decades of service as a financial literacy instructor, your professional expertise, and your mental competence have been callously exploited by individuals who should have been your protectors. She paused, her voice growing stronger. This court formally recognizes that you are the victim of a calculated conspiracy designed to steal not only your life savings, but your dignity, your reputation, and your very identity. The fabricated medical reports, the manipulated videos, and the systematic campaign to portray you as mentally incompetent represent elder abuse in its most insidious form. Those words delivered in open court, recorded for posterity, broadcast globally, restored something I'd thought was lost forever, my sense of professional competence and personal worth. In the weeks following the sentencing, letters began arriving from across the country. Hundreds of them from former students who had seen the trial coverage, from families who had experienced similar abuse, from financial professionals who wanted to express their support. Each one was a balm to wounds I'd carried for so long. The most painful correspondence came from prison. Cole's first letter arrived 6 weeks after his sentencing, written in the shaky handwriting of someone whose world had completely collapsed. Dear Grandma, it began, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I understand if you never want to see or hear from me again. But I need you to know that I'm in therapy now, trying to understand how I became someone capable of such cruelty to the person who saved my life as a baby. The letter continued for several pages, a raw outpouring of remorse and self-examination. He wrote about the gambling addiction that had consumed him, about the drug debts that had made him desperate, about how he'd convinced himself that my money was somehow rightfully his because of everything I'd done for the family. I remember now what you sacrificed when I was born, he wrote, his handwriting becoming even more unsteady. How you used your entire retirement fund to pay for my heart surgery. How you never told anyone what it cost you. You literally saved my life, and I repaid you by destroying yours. I don't know how to live with that knowledge. Reading his letter, I felt not triumph, but a profound maternal sadness. This broken young man was still my grandson, still the baby whose life I'd bought with my retirement savings. His crimes were unforgivable, but he was paying a price, that would destroy his entire future. The most meaningful reconciliation came with Brenda. 3 months after the trial ended, she appeared at my restored home, her face swollen from crying, carrying a bouquet of flowers from my own garden that she'd been tending in my absence. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking, before she could say anything else. "I don't know how to begin to apologize for what I allowed to happen to you. I was terrified of Cole's debts destroying our family, afraid of facing the truth about his problems, and I let him convince me that you were the obstacle to our financial security." Our conversation lasted hours. Brenda spoke about how Cole had gradually convinced her that I was becoming a burden, how he'd manipulated her fear of losing their home to his debts, how she'd been slowly conditioned to see my financial independence as somehow selfish or unrealistic. "I kept telling myself we were protecting the family," she said through tears. "But the truth is, I was protecting myself from having to confront how badly Cole was spiraling. It was easier to believe you were the problem than to face the fact that my son had become someone I didn't recognize." But Brenda didn't just offer apologies, she offered action. She'd already begun volunteering with elder advocacy groups, using her own story as a cautionary tale about how families can be manipulated into participating in financial abuse. She'd also started therapy to address her own guilt and to learn how to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty. "I want to spend whatever time I have left making this right," she said. "I know I can never undo what I did to you, but I want to be the daughter you deserved to have all along." David's path to redemption was more complex. His letter from his supervised living facility arrived 4 months after the trial, filled with the kind of self-examination that comes from losing everything you thought defined you. "Patty," he wrote, "I don't know how to explain how I became someone who could participate in destroying the woman who had been nothing but kind to our family. I was so afraid of losing our financial security that I convinced myself your independence was a threat to our stability." He wrote about the therapy sessions that were helping him understand how Cole had systematically manipulated his fears, how he'd been gradually conditioned to see me as an obstacle rather than a family member deserving protection and respect. "I realize now that I was never protecting my family," he continued. "I was protecting my own comfort, my own financial situation, my own ability to avoid dealing with Cole's real problems. I used your supposed mental decline as an excuse to avoid confronting my son's criminal behavior. The healing with Ethan and Chloe was the most important and most difficult. Now, 17 and 15 respectively, they were old enough to understand the magnitude of what had been done and their own roles in it. When they finally visited me, they could barely speak through their tears. Grandma Patty, Ethan said, I know I said terrible things about you participated in those videos that made you look crazy. I believed what my parents told me about your mind not working right, and I was too young and stupid to question it. Chloe was even more devastated. I told you to die, she whispered, her face buried in her hands. I actually told my own grandmother to die, and I said it because my brother convinced me you were just a burden making everyone miserable. These conversations weren't easy, and the healing process would take years. But they were real, authentic connections built on truth rather than manipulation. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could see the possibility of genuine family relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. My victory was complete, but it was bittersweet. Cole was in prison, his life destroyed by his own choices and addiction. Brenda was struggling with guilt and the loss of the son she thought she'd known. David was facing the reality that his family had been built on lies and financial abuse. The truth had prevailed, but at such a tremendous cost. As I stood in my restored home for the first time in 2 years, looking at my returned furniture and my recovered financial records, I felt not triumph, but a profound sadness for all the pain that could have been avoided if love had been stronger than greed. Still, my money was restored. My reputation was vindicated. My professional competence was officially recognized. And for the first time in years, I could breathe freely knowing that justice had been served and that my true character had been revealed to the world. The real work of healing could finally begin. 2 years after the trial ended, I stood in my kitchen, making coffee on a peaceful Sunday morning, watching the sunrise paint my restored garden in shades of gold and amber. The flowers I'd planted decades ago had survived my absence and were blooming more beautifully than ever. Like me, they'd endured a harsh season, but had emerged stronger and more vibrant. My home was truly mine again, but it felt different now. Not like a shrine to past sorrows, but like a sanctuary of hard-won wisdom and authentic relationships. Every room held memories that Cole and Brenda had tried to twist into weapons against me, but now those memories felt sacred again, protected by truth and honored by the family relationships we were slowly rebuilding. My financial security was completely restored and more stable than it had ever been. The restitution, combined with the return of my seized assets and the settlement of various legal claims, had left me more comfortable than I'd been before the abuse began. But more importantly, I'd undergone the long-awaited cataract surgery that Cole had prevented me from having. My vision was crystal clear for the first time in years, a perfect metaphor for the clarity I'd gained about myself and my relationships. My days had found a rhythm that filled me with purpose and peace. 3 mornings a week, I offered financial literacy workshops specifically designed for seniors, teaching them to recognize and defend against the kinds of family financial abuse I'd experienced. The work felt like a homecoming, using my expertise not just for individual benefit, but to protect an entire vulnerable population. Remember, I would tell my students, financial predators often come disguised as loving family members. The most important lesson I can teach you is that anyone who tries to isolate you from your money, your professional support network, or your independent decision-making is not acting in your best interest, no matter how much they claim to love you. The workshops had grown from a small group at the community center to a nationally recognized program that was being replicated in senior centers across the country. Speaking engagements took me to conferences where I met other survivors and professionals working to combat elder financial abuse. Brenda had become the family member I'd always hoped she could be. Our relationship had blossomed into something profound and authentic, built on the foundation of shared truth and mutual accountability. She visited 3 times a week, and we'd spend hours working in the garden, cooking together, and planning the financial literacy programs we were developing for other seniors. "I understand now why you fought so hard," she told me one afternoon, as we planted new roses where Cole's damage had killed the old ones. "You weren't just protecting your money. You were protecting your dignity, your independence, and your right to make your own choices. I'm so sorry it took me so long to see that." Together, we'd created educational materials that helped families recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation before it destroyed their relationships. Brenda had discovered a gift for connecting with adult children who were being pressured by other family members to participate in elder abuse. "I know how easy it is to convince yourself you're protecting the family," she would tell them, "but when you take away an elderly person's autonomy, you're not protecting them, you're destroying them." David's letters continued to arrive regularly charting his slow but genuine progress toward understanding and redemption. His early correspondence had been desperate and self-pitying, but over time, his writing had evolved into something deeper and more reflective. "I'm learning about the psychology of financial abuse in my counseling program," he wrote in one recent letter, "understanding how predators use family loyalty and fear to manipulate their victims. I see now that I wasn't protecting my family. I was participating in a crime that's more common and more devastating than I ever imagined." While I couldn't envision a close personal relationship with David in the future, I'd reached a place of cautious hope about his journey toward making amends to the community of elder abuse survivors. The reconciliation with Ethan and Chloe had been even more meaningful than I dared hope. Now, 18 and 16 respectively, they'd grown into thoughtful young adults who understood not just what had happened, but why it mattered for their own futures. Ethan had decided to major in social work, specializing in elder advocacy. "I want to help prevent what happened to you from happening to other grandparents," he'd told me with the fierce determination that reminded me of myself at his age. "I want to use what I learned from our family's mistakes to protect other families." Chloe had become passionate about financial literacy education, helping me develop curriculum materials that made complex financial concepts accessible to seniors who might be vulnerable to manipulation. "What happened to you taught me that money isn't just about numbers," she'd said. "It's about power and respect and the right to make your own choices." Cole remained in prison, serving his sentence in isolation from the family. His letters had stopped coming after the first year, and according to Brenda, he'd refused all visits and had cut off contact with everyone. I felt sorry for him, but I'd learned that some people choose their own prisons long before the law puts them there. My transformation into a national advocate for elder financial protection had given new meaning to my life in ways I'd never expected. The memoir I'd written, Trust Betrayed: A Fight for Financial Freedom and Family Truth, had become a bestseller and helped countless families recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation before it destroyed their relationships. But the most profound transformation was internal. The woman who had once defined herself through service to ungrateful family members had learned to value her own worth independent of others' recognition. The woman who had kept financial secrets to protect people who ultimately betrayed her had found the courage to speak truth, no matter how painful it might be for others to hear. Standing in my garden on this peaceful morning, I felt a presence that wasn't grief or regret, but gratitude for the strength I'd discovered when everything was taken from me, gratitude for the authentic relationships that had emerged from the ashes of betrayal, and gratitude for the opportunity to transform my suffering into a source of protection and healing for others. I was 73 now, with silver hair and laugh lines that spoke of joy rediscovered. My home was filled with laughter again, Brenda's family, my recovered grandchildren, the seniors I mentored through my programs. My calendar was full of meaningful work, cherished relationships, and quiet moments of profound contentment. Cole had tried to steal my identity, my inheritance, and my legacy. Instead, he'd given me something I'd never expected, the chance to discover who I truly was when everything else was stripped away. He'd revealed a strength I didn't know I possessed, and a purpose I'd never imagined. The woman who had once hidden her professional expertise to avoid seeming threatening to family members had become someone who used that expertise to protect an entire vulnerable population. The grandmother who had nearly died of heartbreak had learned that the heart's capacity for forgiveness is infinite, but that boundaries and self-respect are equally sacred. I was no longer just Cole's grandmother or Brenda's mother or a victim of family financial abuse. I was Patricia Peterson, advocate, survivor, mentor, teacher. I was a woman who had faced the worst that family betrayal could offer and had chosen to respond with wisdom, courage, and an unshakable commitment to protecting others from the same devastation. In losing everything, I had found myself. In fighting for justice, I had discovered my true purpose. In choosing healing over bitterness, I had found peace. This was not the life I had planned, but it was the life I was meant to live. Years have passed since that terrible time when I thought my world had ended, and I can honestly say that my life today radiates an unshakable inner peace, hard-won through immense adversity. My cherished home, once threatened with foreclosure and loss, is now a sanctuary of vibrant life, frequently filled with the laughter of Brenda and my grandchildren, our bonds rebuilt on honesty, respect, and deep affection. We've created something beautiful here, not just a restored household, but a living testament to the power of truth and the possibility of authentic family relationships built on mutual respect rather than manipulation. I've become a respected voice in the national conversation about elder financial protection. My story serving as both a warning and a beacon of hope for countless others fighting similar battles. My days are rich with newfound purpose, the quiet joy of my hard-won independence, the profound satisfaction of work that truly matters, and the deep contentment that comes from living authentically. Through my foundation, my writing, and my educational programs, I've transformed my deepest pain into a source of protection and healing for vulnerable seniors across the country. Looking back on my arduous journey, I understand now that my greatest strength lay not in blind trust or silent endurance, but in courageously confronting deception and fighting for my fundamental right to dignity and autonomy. I learned that self-worth is an unshakable foundation that no one can take from you, and that true family relationships must be built on transparency and genuine care, not financial obligation or emotional manipulation. I carry no bitterness toward Cole, only a profound wisdom gained from transforming my deepest betrayal into a force for justice and protection in the world. This story is a testament to the insidious nature of family financial exploitation and the devastating impact of elder abuse, but more importantly, it's proof of the profound courage that exists within each of us to fight for our fundamental rights and dignity. It demonstrates that truth will ultimately prevail, that respect can be reclaimed even after devastating betrayal, and that a life of purpose and authentic connection is always possible. To anyone facing similar battles, know this: your expertise matters. Your voice has power, and you are never too old to reclaim your life and demand the respect you deserve. Trust your instincts, document everything, and remember that the strongest families are built on truth, not convenience.